It's time we listen to the soil. Soil is something that we take for granted. Much like our moms, we are carried away with the issues that we see about climate change, water conservation, and health issues, and so on. Soil is something that we take for granted. This took millions of years to form. It did not happen overnight. It did not come by default. Just to make 1 to 2 centimeters thickness of soil to be formed on Earth, it takes approximately 500 to 1,000 years of time. This topsoil is the one that is keeping us alive today. It is the basis for all our food systems. If there was no soil, none of us would have been here. So soil is life. If there is running water and if there is wind coming in, you will see this topsoil being washed away. Almost 30% of India's land area is under desertification at different levels. We do know that if this soil erosion is not checked, it is not taken care of, then our food systems will collapse. Without soil, there is no life. Good morning, everybody. I'm Sarada, and I'm very, very glad to be here on a weekend to see so many people joining and on a topic that's very close to me, close to my heart. And it's really heartening to see so many of you all joining in just to hear about this topic. So to start off, as he shared, I come from a very multidisciplinary background. And so I'm no expert on soil or I'm no ecologist. Just like you all, I was very, very interested and curious and learned along the way. So as we go through this, I've taken a sort of a stance that most of you all are coming from various backgrounds. So it's pretty generic, and we can take questions at the end of the session if there are any specific deeper questions about a particular point that I make here. The topic for today is it's time we listen to the soil. And the reason I picked this particular topic versus a lot of other burning topics is this is something that we usually do not talk about very often. We are carried away with the issues that we see about climate change, water conservation, and health issues, and so on. Soil is something that we take for granted, much like our moms. We just believe that it's there and it's always there to serve us. And why will it not behave the way we want to? So we've just sort of taken soil for granted. And this presentation is sort of a way to bring you all up to speed in terms of why we are really in trouble and why I think that soil really needs to be conserved. So I'm starting off with the history of soil. So when Earth was formed almost 4.543 billion years ago, Earth was not actually having soil on it. It was a very, very molten sort of, I think you can see my cursor, but you can see the image here. It was a red molten structure that looked like Earth but did not have soil. So soil, the way that we know today, is just maybe in the planet's history, just 10% of time ago that it came into being. So that's somewhere around 500 million years ago. And the way soil actually got formed is a lot of organic matter got mixed with minerals, air, and water in a particular chemical composition. And that's the reason we have different types of soil across the globe. So it's very important to remember that this 5% organic, although it says 5% here, this is critical to see how soil behaves today. And so I wanted to just share that this is not something that's been there from day one on Earth. It took a lot of time. Life had to come in and life had to mix with the rocks that we see. And it's very interesting if you want to understand how soil came into being. But all in all, we just need to understand now for this particular presentation that this took millions of years to form. It did not happen overnight. It did not come by default. And it is a very, very, very slow process for the soil to be formed on Earth. So that's my first slide, just to set the history of why we are thinking that this needs to be conserved. So if I were to sort of go into an educative mode, what is exactly soil that we talked about? I mean, here I said, okay, there is a mix of all of these things, but what is actually soil? So soil has multiple levels, and it starts at the bottom at the bed as something that's called as bedrock. Then there is parent material, subsoil, topsoil, organic form, organic soil, organic matter that's there on top of the soil. And then, of course, all the life lives on it. So just this topsoil that you're seeing here, although the image looks very big, just to make 1 to 2 centimeters thickness of soil to be formed on earth, it takes approximately 500 to 1000 years of time. So just to set that in context, your great grandparents would have seen the formation of the topsoil that you're seeing today. So just think about it for a second. This topsoil is the one that is keeping us alive today. It is the basis for all our food systems. I'll come to that. But just to make this, it takes that longer time. It is not something that is there by default and then, it'll always be there. So there are a lot of issues of what happens to the top layer, organic and topsoil. It gets washed away. So every time that there is rain, what happens is the water sort of carries away the soil if it is allowed to. And water obviously is a very energetic force which we cannot stop. Unless there is life on top that is sort of holding with the roots down to the topsoil, it can get easily washed off. So that's the context. If there is grass, if there are trees on top, if there is something that's sort of holding this soil and putting it back in its place, and it's usually the roots of plants and trees, then this topsoil stays. Otherwise, when it rains, it just gets washed off. And it's not just the rain, it is also the wind. The wind can also blow it away. So these are the top two issues. If there is running water and if there is wind coming in, you will see this topsoil being washed away. So why do we really need to worry about soil, right? I mean, let's say tomorrow there are soilless farms that are there that will feed us. Let's assume that, a lot of things will be solved for us. But why do we really need to talk about soil? Because soil is the basis of all the life that we see today. If you look at evolution, the path that it's taken, if there was no soil, none of us would have been here. Forget about the plants, even we wouldn't have been there. So in the soil, you will see a lot of life. So one spoonful of soil, of healthy soil, holds more life than all of humanity put together. Just to set that in context, the 9 billion people or people, whatever the count is of people on earth, you will find in one spoonful of soil. And that's the amount of life that it holds. Other than the life, of course, it does a ton of other things magically, just like a mother. It sort of gives us nutrients, which allows us to have our food chains in place, our food systems in place, and it also holds the water. So if there is no water in the soil, then we will be flooded. So the soil sort of absorbs all the water that's falling on earth. It also is the biggest carbon sink. When I say carbon sink, people who are interested in climate change will understand that if the carbon is not absorbed and it stays back on what we call atmosphere or on top of the earth, then this earth will get so heated up that human life or no life will basically survive. So it's just without soil, there is no food, there is no life that is there inside that, there is no biodiversity, there is basically most of the things that we take for granted today are not possible. You will not have drinking water, there is no food, there is no life. So soil is life. And the way, plants today, when we talk about food systems, soil is not just holding up the roots. Other than all this life that you're seeing here, there are tons of minerals in the soil. Again, I'll go back to my first slide. So 45% of the soil is minerals. I mean, this is an ideal soil composition. Obviously, it changes. But just remember this chart. So there are minerals, there is air, there is water, and then there is organic matter for soil to be healthy. So in this case, all the minerals that are there are the ones that are feeding plants to sort of make their food other than the sunlight that they receive. If these are missing, then the plant really cannot thrive and cannot make food. And everything that we today take for granted is all coming because of these minerals in the soil. So as we go along, this is just the basic steps that I want you all to remember. And then when I spoke about, our food systems, this is one part. And the second one, as I was saying, if there is no soil, this water will not stay in one place, right? I mean, if it is not absorbed by soil, the water will run away to the ocean. Run away is the wrong word, but you understand what I'm saying. So our drinking water supply, groundwater supply that we take for granted today, all the bore wells that we're drilling across the state and the country, so much so that there is one study that says that the Earth's axis has slightly shifted because of the number of bore wells that have been put into Earth. That's another topic for another day. But without soil, we will not have any water holding up in one place. There is nothing that will keep the water for us to sort of draw. And today, Obviously, the amount of water that we consume is another issue, but we are continuously drilling up this with bore pumps and so on. All of that is possible only because the soil is holding up the water. The soil itself allows the water to be retained, a healthy soil. And if the soil is sort of caked up at the top where it doesn't allow water to to sort of be absorbed, then we will not have drinking water. And when we talk about drought, other than the food systems collapsing, it is also the water systems that will collapse. The third big piece that usually doesn't get spoken that often, but let's assume that tomorrow with some technology we'll figure out how to keep ourselves alive without food and water. Let's just assume. Even then, even if we somehow survive all of it, the soil, the amount of carbon that it absorbs, and again, just to go back to the basics of what we learned in our school, the plants, work on photosynthesis, they absorb carbon dioxide and then, of course, leave out oxygen. But the amount of carbon dioxide that's absorbed by plants, other than that, even the soil absorbs. And if the soil doesn't absorb carbon, then obviously the amount of carbon dioxide that's left out will mean that the earth will get heated up, and our climate change issues that we see today, we don't know what percentage can be attributed to soil loss, the topsoil loss, but basically soil is the carbon sink, along with the trees, of course. So just to encapsulate, it's our food systems, it holds our water, it also takes care of the biodiversity, the amount of life that is there in the soil, and then of course it's also the biggest carbon sink. So now I want to just take a step back to talk about from our perspective, right? Soil as a whole, if you were to just take from India's perspective, I just want you all to look at this. This is a black and white map, I hope you can see, but there's a globe picture here, and there is a small circle on the globe that just encompasses India, China, and a bit of Southeast Asia, most of the Southeast Asia. So just to give you all a perspective, in this circle, 50% of the human population stays here. 50. Half the population stays on this small circle, which is just 4,000 kilometers radius from a small city called Yuxi in China. And this is called Yuxi Circle. Basically, half the human population survive here. And one of the big reasons why they survive, and of course, India is a big part of it, wherever you see this darker yellow is where the population is higher, is because the number of rivers that we have, healthy soil that we have, the alluvial soil that makes the plains so fertile that for centuries, India has been home to, and whatever the stats say now, we are the most populous country in the world, of course. But why was it possible? It was possible because, and not just today, if you look at history, at any point of time, India sort of held 25% of the world's population. The small one country, I won't say small, but this one country held close to 25% of the population through multitudes of history. You go back 100 years, you go back 200, 300, whenever history has been recorded. And one of the big reasons why this circle holds 50% of the population is the rivers. The rivers that flow down from Himalayas in India, the rivers that are there in the south. And of course, China also has these large rivers like Yangtze, and Southeast Asia is blessed with the monsoon rain. The reason I'm saying all of this is the Earth's population has survived here purely because of the quality of the soil. The reason we are so populous, you can talk about policies, you can go back and say, okay, we've not had multiple issues can be discussed, but at the heart of the issue is that our country has one of the most fertile soils in the world. And that's because of the multiple rivers that crisscross the country. And why we have these rivers and why is it that we receive so much rainfall is the unique place. And I want you all to see to the right. India is one of those countries. This is a map that's taken. This is a screenshot of the satellite view in the night. India is the only country where you'll see the population is spread across this country. It is not to one side of the country. It is not as though people are concentrated only on the cities, which is the case, but they are pretty spread around. And this is very unique. And why am I talking about this in case of soil presentation is most countries, including China. Okay, so this whole thing is China. 90% of the population is on the east coast. This is all desert. India is blessed because we have a mix of soils, and these soils sort of have allowed our generations, our ancestors to sort of grow the food, different types of food, and people came flooding to get our food, whether it's pepper or spices or the amount of rice that we grow. So we are blessed because of these monsoons. We are in the Indian Ocean. So there is a very strange phenomenon that's seen only in the Indian Ocean, where we can predict when the winds blow from the western side and the eastern side. And then we have a monsoon timeline, which is sort of predictable, which has allowed both the food to grow and also our commerce to grow, where our shipfarers used to travel to other parts of the world, allowing a lot of commerce to happen much before even the Britishers came in. And the uniqueness of this is primarily, again, if you see, these are the different types of soils that we have in India. There is a forest and mountain soil, there's deserts, we have the alluvial soil, the black soil, red soil, laterite and lateric soil. So different types of soil. Again, if you go back to the geographical formation of the country, the Indian continent, when it sort of, hit the Asian continent, I won't say Indian continent, but the Indian submass, the Himalayas shot up, and then I'm not using the right language, but you'll understand. So the rivers that flow through this, and also the Deccan Plateau here, Deccan Plateau is much older than the Himalayas. It's been there since when our Indian mass was connected to the African mass. So the mix of soils is very unique. And each of these allows us to grow different types of food, allows us to mine. Okay, we don't have oil, which we are seeing in our news today. But basically, we are self-sufficient primarily because of the types of soil that we have. Saying that, the reason why we need to pay attention to this is we are blessed. And if we want to continue to be blessed and we need to feed our masses, then we need to make sure that our soil is taken care of. So that's the long and short of it. And just to give you all a perspective, across the globe, this is a map that talks about the spread of the agricultural land. So the biggest is China with 2 million plus acres of land. India is only at 689,000. US is at 1.6 million. But more or less, we're not completely self-sufficient, but we're able to feed our people thanks to green revolution and so on. And it's important to remember that the most populous country is not actually the one that has the biggest agricultural land. So we have a long way to go, and even a small slip up in terms of how our soil works for us will result in a catastrophe where we cannot feed the billions or the population that we have. So what are these issues? Why are we so worried about soil? Why am I saying that there is a crisis? Why am I saying that we need to listen to the soil? There is a concept called desertification that is taking place, where the soil sort of becomes, like I said, it needs to hold minerals, it needs to hold water, it needs to hold air and organic matter. When all of these fail, the soil is turning into, the word that's used commonly is desertification. And then climate change, like I said, it's the biggest carbon sink. If it fails to do what it's supposed to do, we're removing trees. To a certain extent, it's contributing to the climate change. And then the biodiversity loss. If there is no life, if there is no ecosystem, then we, as one of the many species that live on this earth, when that balance is lost, along with the rest of the life, we will also get wiped out. So basically, soil has all these issues going on, and I want to sort of focus on desertification because that's one of the biggest reason that we see. And the villain for desertification primarily is soil erosion. And when we say erosion, it means that whatever the types of soil, the soil mix that we saw here, if it is wiping out the top soil, we call it soil erosion, or the organic matter. If these two layers are wiped out, and it can wipe out other things also, but if these two are wiped out, we still call it soil erosion. And these, like I was saying earlier, happens because either there's a running water, so there is a rain, and then the water sort of takes away the topsoil with it. If there is no grass cover, if there are no trees on it, it is not protected, or there is a very, very strong wind which can sort of wipe out if there is nothing else holding the soil together. So this soil erosion, the technical description is that it removes the upper layer of the soil from which plants get most of the nutrients and water. So this is the crux of the issue. And why does the land erosion occur? It's because primarily there is no cover on the land. And this can happen due to multiple issues. It can be grazing. It can be when we remove the crops, or rather when we harvest the crop, and then the soil is left bare. There are no trees, there are no windbreaks for the farms, and hence soil erosion occurs. So it's not just land. Okay, today I'm focusing on land because that's the big agricultural system, like I mentioned earlier. But there are a lot of other types of soil erosion that are occurring. And one big issue, again, if I go back to our Indian map, we have the biggest coastline, or one of the biggest coastlines for any country. and a lot of the coastline is getting eroded. So this is one, I think, a report that was published recently, which shares that India's coastline is eroding. And why does the coastline get eroded? Again, it goes back to something very similar, where we're constructing too much on the coast. There are no mangroves, everything, all the trees that were sort of, sea grasses that were holding the sand together are being lost. So multiple issues, but this is also, again, usually we don't think about this when we talk about soil erosion, but this is also one big issue that is hitting India. Then the desertification, as per a latest report, or rather, this is 2019, almost 30% of India's land area is under desertification at different levels. So the darker the red, the higher the desertification. And again, as I explained, desertification is where the soil basically is getting hardened up. It doesn't have water, it doesn't have minerals, or there is no air trapped inside. It could be any of those issues, but usually we see that it's absolutely dry at the top. And so we talk about, land harvest failing, agricultural crops failing. So this is one of the biggest issue that India is today facing. And this map sort of tells you where this is happening. We don't usually talk about this too much. Usually when you talk about soil erosion, no one talks about this, but there is also a lot of illegal sand mining that happens in the country today. And this sand is, of course, used for the construction purposes. And the river sand is sort of, the most preferred one for the construction. We don't have an alternative. And so we do need it for our construction. We do need it for our cities. But there is a lot of unplanned illegal sand mining that happens that sort of takes away the soil from the riverbeds. And then again, it is also, I think I shouldn't put desertification, this is the wrong header here, but this is also part of the soil erosion. Then another issue which supports a lot of livelihoods, and hence usually it is not spoken by politicians or ecologists talk about it, but no one else, is overgrazing. So India is one of the biggest beef exporters. It is also, given the population, even if our per capita consumption of meat is less, we have a very big issue with overgrazing. So our milk, our curd, our everyday consumption, it's a lifestyle that all Indians for generations have been following. And we respect our animals, we of course revere the cow, but the problem is when the numbers really, really shoot up, and all these animals feed on the grass that is there out in the open. When the grass sort of is eaten away, again, it leads to desertification. The reason being, there is no cover on top of the soil. It gets washed away in the water, it gets blown away by the wind. And we don't even allow the grass to sort of grow up, because this grazing is a continuous activity. It is not as though that I will cut the grass one day and feed the cow, or the cow comes and eats, or the buffalo comes and eats, and next day it doesn't need. It is almost an everyday activity. So we don't give the time for the soil to sort of recuperate. And you may ask, why is it that this is happening now? Didn't we always have these animals with us that we really sort of, pray to and on? The numbers were very, very small, and our ancestors were very smart. They would have a cyclical system. Today, you graze the cows and buffaloes in one place, they were taken to another lot in another location. They had the freedom of place, they had the freedom of lesser population to feed. So it was never an issue. But now the numbers are so huge, overgrazing sort of completely is destroying the soil, the grass cover. Then the most important one, which all of us today, just associate with soil erosion, is too much of fertilizer usage, too much of pesticide usage. Our land, which is giving us food, is being filled with just enormous quantity of fertilizers. So the soil sort of loses its own capability to sort of process its own minerals. There is no, even soil is a living, whether we don't call, I don't know, technically we call it a living structure, but basically it's a living, breathing thing that also needs its own space to sort of recuperate, which we don't allow for. So excess of fertilizer and excess of pesticides, any chemicals that we are dumping in, and you cannot blame the farmers. At the end of it, they do need the produce, and countries that have tried to sort of take away this. We've seen the case of Sri Lanka, which sort of one of the reasons for the economic collapse was they tried to switch completely to organic overnight. So there are a lot of these interlinked issues. This is the most common one that we read in our newspapers every day when we talk about soil just losing its fertile nature is because of overpumping of chemicals. So we spoke about so many problems. What is it that we can do? I mean, when we talk about it's not just 1 kg of some material that we can quickly wash and keep it back, or some small thing that we can sort of address. So, what is it that one can do to address this? Because there are no easy answers here. You stop the fertilizers, then the food production collapses. Can you stop mining? You cannot. Can we, so anything that you sort of try to address, it comes back to the same thing. We cannot feed our population, and we do not have a control on how the soil is being put to use. So again, scientists talk about really, really like technical stuff, soil washing, which is impossible. You can amend that, which basically you add something to the soil to make it more nutrient filled again, which I'll come to in a minute about how this is being done. The physical technology is, can you really like sort of do something where you remove a particular layer of soil, refill with something else, and so on. Microbial remediation, you add microbial life back into the soil. And again, there are a lot of solutions around this. Basically, you fix the soil with even vermi remediation, is you put the earthworms and things like vermicompost and other things which will change. But these are all very theoretical. When it comes to everyday life, it's very difficult a small farmer to sort of, go through this whole process. Will the mining companies stop mining? Will the coastal cities stop constructing? So it's easy to put these charts. Real action is very, very tough. So I'll just focus first on the agricultural side of things, right? I mean, what do you do to sort of stop this soil erosion? So there are a few techniques that the experts have put together, the farmers have learned along the way. So planting vegetation around the crops, not necessarily just the crop, you sort of use windbreakers. Mulching is basically you add some straw and other material around the plant so that there is no evaporation of water, and so the water will be retained. It also allows the microbial life to come back. So one big reason in why soil is so nutritious, again, I'll go back to the first slide. It has a lot of organic life, even if it is 5%. That organic life sort of gives, it's in the rhizosphere, and the amount of microorganisms that are there in that soil sort of help build all the different minerals that are needed by the plants. And that's the reason when you add earthworms or when you add other life into the soil, it sort of makes the soil more fertile. So mulching helps with that. Then you sort of somehow use, you don't actually flatten the fields, but you follow the contour of the land. If it is slightly hilly, then you sort of terrace your plantations. You try to cut down the runoff water by using various mechanisms. So in Rajasthan, for example, there is a concept called, most of you all can speak Hindi, it's called Adha Chand. So Adha Chand is, you don't make actually a pit for the soil, pit for the plant. You just cut 3/4 of it, like adha, a half moon shape. And the direction of the sun is taken into consideration, so the water doesn't evaporate too quickly but stays in. It helps with water conservation and also protects the soil to a certain extent. So the implementing terracing, contouring, you sort of exclude the cattle out of your fields. And so these are some of the things that farmers already know. Very difficult to follow again. But again, one of the other big things is cover crops. What you mean by cover crops is, usually we do monoplantations, whether it's where you're growing rice or you're growing wheat or tomatoes or whatever. So we just put one crop, a rubber plantation, and then we expect that the soil will hold up. So one of the ways to sort of cut the erosion is to use multiple crops or cover crops. When you, let's say you're harvesting, you make sure that there is another crop there so that it holds on to the soil. And this is, again, our ancestors knew this very well. They would always use like chana or gram or something in between so that the new nitrogen cycle gets fixed. We lost all of that, or we have stopped to follow in the name of adding more fertilizers. And anyway, the produce is coming out high. At least it did initially. Now it is failing. Then there is a very controversial concept called no-till or reduce the. So basically, don't use these tractors to sort of plow, which goes against all our common sense or what we understand as farming. But scientists are saying that the more you do this, we're going to lose soil. It's a very, very questionable, very controversial one. How do you actually farm if you don't till it? But in the name of soil conservation, this is something that has been suggested again, especially people with these really hundreds of acres of land, not so much in India, but in other places. Building check dams, bunding, small water conservation ponds inside the soil, inside the farms, to some extent sort of make sure that the water even if it drains, it sort of stays within the farm, and then the moisture sort of goes back into the farm. So the multiples of these, and primarily we keep hearing about afforestation and reforestation. Wherever we have cut down the forest, bring back the trees into the count. So these are all various ways where, when it comes to the land where we are using for farming, or where the deforestation has taken place, the land is eroded. These are the suggested activities. Then to come to what I was talking about earlier here, cover crops, there is also something called as intercrops. So this is just a graphic to show this is how a forest works. It has a mix of big trees and then smaller shrubs and grass and rest of it. When you have rubber monoculture, or you take any monoculture, all this eucalyptus and whatever these big agroforestry things that are going on, if you don't have crops in between, or rather another type of smaller plant or a tree in between, it will not hold the soil. So this is something that has now moved away from monoculture plantation and try to do a mix and match of the sizes and what suits the soil there. Now I'm going into a completely different one. Till now we spoke about agriculture and growing stuff. There is another big issue where India sort of is also very big on mining. And again, with the news, you would have seen how dependent we are on coal today. Most of our 60% of our power supply comes from coal. Today, we take our electricity and the rest of it for granted, but we're mining coal to make sure that we have this power supply. Fossil fuels, of course, we import, and we all know what's happening today. So we can't stop mining. Until I think couple of decades ago, or even before that, we would just mine and leave those lands. And they're completely degraded now. And this run into a very, very big chunk of the land, although as compared to agriculture, it's much more smaller. So now there are policies in place where the people who are mining it are expected to leave the soil in a shape where it can grow back life. So till recently, we did not have these policies in place. Now, once the mining is done, the same people who mined it are expected to sort of put back the ecology in place. It may or may not thrive. It's another question, but at least we should try. So this is another type of land degradation or soil that is being lost. That's we're trying to do fixes. And globally, there are some new ways where the soil erosion and soil problems are there everywhere across the globe. So there is a concept called phytomining. You can see it here. So phytomining is basically wherever the soils have a lot of minerals or a lot of everything that is mined. Now you finished mining and now the soil has very little, so you can't actually just dig and take it. The quantity is very less. So what do you do then? It is not good for agriculture. The soil is still having these minerals. So you grow specific plants on this soil, which is happening in a big way in some of the European countries and in very, very small batches. But I just wanted to give you all a spread of what is happening across the globe. So these plants are then crushed and the minerals are extracted from that. It's a long process, but this is one way to sort of keep, it's not with the intention of keeping the soil erosion in check or desertified soil back. It is with the intent that you make money primarily, but it helps soil conservation, and that's the reason I added it here. So this is relatively a new approach, not too used in India. I don't think anyone is doing this, but this is something that's picking up across the globe. In terms of the coastal erosion check, and just to give you all visual imagery of what happens, mangroves were once there through the coastline of India, be it in what you keep hearing about the mangrove in Mumbai specifically and some in West Bengal. But at some point, our coastline had mangroves through the coastline, the entire coastline. And once we removed mangroves, and mangroves are, if you'll have seen the pictures, they look like these really huge trees with the roots growing into the saline water. They're on the sea coast, they're on the river coast sometimes, where the brackish water mixes. These are the biggest carbon sinks in the world. And we've uprooted all of them and we're continuously uprooting them. And when the mangroves are lost, if something like a tsunami or big waves hit, which is happening, it will just crash into the land. So we are losing the coastal land. Maybe today we talk about in centimeters and inches, but to a city, for example, in Chennai, which is lower than the sea level, the water will just drown the city. And so Tamil Nadu government has been very, very active in trying to sort of fix. They've been having issues with this downpour and the coastal belt getting eroded. So these are actually mangrove plantations. It's not a great picture, but I took it from a newspaper. So it's in black and white. But the forest officials have planted 20,000 mangrove saplings of 5 species along the Buckingham Canal near the Mahabalipuram Road. So these fish fin type of things that you're seeing is where mangroves have been planted. It takes a very, very long time for mangroves to grow. And so now other states are also picking up. AP has put out a specific, I think they're also doing the mangrove plantation. So you plant now, then there is hope for maybe, in 20 years or so, it'll start to show results. I mean, even the young mangroves help, but you really need these in place to make sure that the coastal line is sort of protected. The fertilizers that we buy today are high on ammonia, which is basically nitrogen, and that is sort of giving us a bigger produce. If you didn't add fertilizers, maybe let's say 1 acre would give us 1 sack of rice, and you add fertilizer, now it's become 3 sacks, and hence we're able to feed the entire population. When you remove fertilizers, what is it that you can replace with? So India today is using, at least most of the farmers have begun to look at Jivamrut. And this again goes back to the way our ancestors used to do this, where cow dung is mixed with good soil, again with chickpea flour, sometimes jaggery, and then cow urine, and they leave it in a container to ferment. And this is sort of then, if they're using drip irrigation, they're actually sending this periodically into the fields. If they're not, then it's sort of used in the water that is sprayed, or in the irrigation channels that they sort of send the water to. So this is working out very, very well, and so much so that now we're also exporting cow dung and cow urine, I think. So this is a natural way, but to scale up is very difficult. But at least there is a trial, and these alternates have begun to be used. Similarly, there is another remediation which is not very well heard of or not popular in the common media. It's called biochar. Now, biochar in our language, it's not charcoal, but it is like charcoal. In this, if you burn organic matter, let's say burnt wood or so, in a controlled process where you don't actually allow it's called pyrolysis, you can read up on it. The output is like, it looks like charcoal, but the technical word is biochar. And this biochar is working out to be a very, very good remediation for the soil. Not all types, but again, what it does is, you all know how charcoal feels like, right? It's very, very light, it's very airy, it's very porous. Now, when you put this into the soil, it makes the soil absolutely absorbent so that it can soak in the water. Then it also gives a nice home to the microorganisms. It sort of activated biochar sort of helps more microorganisms build into the soil. And when it does that, the soil automatically becomes fertile. So biochar is something across the globe people are now sort of focusing on. In our country, there is a lot of research going on. People are using biochar. And I personally think if this sort of taken very seriously, then you should have units everywhere across the fields, where instead of people burning up the farms, leading to issues like you see in Delhi, where in December it's all fog and smog and asthma issues, and AQI shoots up because people are burning up the fields. Instead of that, if you do it in a protected setup where you work on a pyrolysis process, it will turn to biochar. And when you add this biochar, your soil will automatically become fertile. And of course, I'm just sort of doing a very sweeping statement here. Activated biochar, and needs to be used carefully. Excess, again, could cause issues. The types of biochar vary. But this is something that I think if you sort of look at it in a circular economy, you can sort of move people to make money on burning their, the farm leftover plants, and sort of also make their soil fertile. This needs a lot of focus, which is happening. Again, a lot of research needs to happen. I work for Dharmavana. We also work on a project where we're looking at bamboo biochar. So this is one of the remediation processes. I'm not running you all through the image, but broadly, the logic is that it will allow the soil to absorb more water. It will allow microbial life to sort of thrive. So that's the story behind biochar. Then there is another, a little controversial, but this is something that is picking up across, and there are a couple of startups even in India doing this. It is called enhanced rock weathering. So the background to this is, like I said earlier, we did not have soil on Earth. We had rocks. And then when organic matter came in, and this process took millions of years, and we have soil. So to a smaller extent, I'm generalizing here. I hope there are no experts on ERW. They'll laugh at this. But basically, you take rock, like for example, basalt rock, In Deccan, you find a lot of that. You powder it and then you put it on the fields. And what this does actually is more like it allows, one of the activity that it results in is it will help the nutrients from the rock improve the soil health and crop yield, one of the many advantages. It also does other things where we believe it addresses climate change. And there are some startups that have signed up with the likes of Microsoft and others to give carbon credits in the name of doing ERW. And they're doing a lot of work in Chhattisgarh, they're doing work in Darjeeling, tea estates, and so on. So this is another process where you add something to the soil to make it more nutritious, just like biochar, but this is completely a different technique. And it does a whole lot of other things for climate change. One of the advantages is the soil becomes a little more fertile. India also has done, as a policy, as a government, it's looking into this very, very fast, very soon. In September 2025, the National Academy of Agricultural Sciences released a paper talking about restoration and improvement of soil health. It's a very long paper, but primarily it all goes back to the common sense. Do not dump too much fertilizer, pesticide into it, do all the erosion checks, and so on. And also the state governments are doing multiple things. So Sikkim, I think most of you will know, it is the first organic state in the world, not just India. So as a state, they do not allow any chemical to enter into their soil. It is a small state. It has also got one of the highest GDPs, thanks to both tourism and also the organic produce that they're doing. Their politicians and policymakers were very serious about this a decade ago. And today it's the state where there's no plastic on the street. Of course, their citizens are much more engaged and deviating, but primarily this state is showing us the path. They've stopped putting any chemical into the soil. Then we also have the young state, or the Andhra Pradesh, not the young but separated state, Andhra Pradesh. So here they're doing a concept called it's Andhra Pradesh Community Managed Natural Farming. So it's APCNF, where the government, Chandrababu Naidu's government especially, is pushing forward with this. There is slow adoption. It will bring down the yield in the first few years, but most of the farmers, or maybe some of the farmers, are showing interest and they're pursuing this. As the word says, natural farming, it's basically do not put any pesticides, do not put any fertilizers into the soil. It is different from organic. Don't ask me how. Again, a lot of technicalities, but basically I just wanted to show that individual states are also taking this leap forward. We realize that the amount of cancer that we are seeing in human beings, the soil erosion, again, because that's the topic. So these are some of the solutions that seem to be working, and this is a long way to go, but these are just the beginnings. Across the globe, there is another completely new topic that I'm picking here. Desertification is a very, very serious problem. In India, we are thinking about how we feed our nation. In other countries, it's a question of survival. So under UN, there is a separate unit called United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification. And so they have their own COP, that's a conference of parties every year where they discuss this. They look at how you solve this globally. Because from UNCCD's approach, what is happening is all the existing deserts that are there across the globe are sort of expanding. So basically, they will eat into the fertile soil. If the desert expands, it will touch the soil where you're actually producing your food. So how do you stop that? How do you stop expansion of this desertification process? So this is, like I said, it's a UN initiative, very, very active in the space. What is it that other people are doing, right? What are the citizens doing? What are some of the global initiatives that seem to be showing us the path? And I'm not talking about generally the agriculture, but overall desertification. So in Africa, think of the size of the continent of Africa. This is like, I don't know which size of continent, but you know how big it is. So across the north part of Africa, this whole yellow line that you see here, northwards is all desert, except for a bit of Morocco here. It's all desert. It's the Sahara Desert. And so now the African nations, all of these, Ethiopia, Eritrea, Sudan, Chad, Nigeria, Mali, all of these are sort of putting up what they call as the green wall. So they're putting up what is called as the Great Green Wall Initiative. And so all the nonprofit citizens, everyone comes together. It's a as you can see, the scale is so massive. They're trying to do plantation here. When I use the word plantation, let me say, okay, it's afforestation on the border of the desert, so that it works as a windbreaker, and then the desert sort of doesn't stretch into the fertile lands. And this is a massive effort, takes billions of dollars, takes millions of citizens to be active in this. Can you think of the size of this project? So it's called the Great Wall of Africa. And again, only time will tell us whether this is working or not, but they're beginning to see the initial success rates. You can look up on YouTube. All you need to see is the Green Wall of Africa and you'll find the results. And this is not just, this is a continent initiative. Then Brazil, it's one of the largest nations, of course, in terms of size. It is also the soya bean capital of the world. Soya bean is the biggest food for cattle. And so their farms are being taken away by soya bean corporate, growing soya bean. And of course, it's home to Amazon. And we all keep talking about Amazon, as the lungs of the earth and so on. So right next to Amazon, there is a place called Cerrado, this place in yellow. Here, what some NGOs are doing is, because the land is being occupied by so much of monoculture and farming, there's the river that runs through this. On both sides, they're sort of putting up afforestation along the banks of the river. It's almost like, I think, 500 miles of land or even longer than that. Again, initiative led by citizens, a mix of NGOs, policymakers support it. If this sort of isn't taken care of, slowly Amazon forest will also be felled for the growing, crop requirements. So this is again a very, very huge initiative. You can look up on what's happening in Cerrado afforestation and you'll be able to see all of them. Again, when we talk about afforestation, it doesn't necessarily mean that you go and put these big trees. It also could be the grasslands need to revive. You just leave the land as is, let it grow what it needs to grow without putting something else, without stopping the water from flowing, so you just need the land to regenerate. And this is a great example of that. They're doing a mix of both for afforestation and leaving the land as is. The biggest and the massive and the biggest size of the project across the globe is the Great Green Wall of China. I'm not talking about the Great Wall of China. This is the Great Green Wall of China. And again, not too commonly seen in our media, but this is China map, the gray one that you see here. As I was saying in my earlier slides, people on the east coast of China is where 90% of the people stay, and the entire rest of China is only just 10%. Why? Because it's all desert. So what happens is Beijing, which is the capital city of China, is somewhere here where you see my cursor. Now, there is a huge amount of sand that blows in. There's a desertification that's happening right at the border of their livable spaces. So back in 2001, their policymakers said they're going to do this huge effort on afforestation, like a 40-year program. And this map is, of course, only showing you till 2020, but this will go on till 2040. And they've done a mix of experiments. I mean, any learning that you want to see in massive afforestation scale, what works, what doesn't work, China has tried it. They've left rabbits in the deserts. They've planted sort of hay into the desert. They've left, I think, foxes, if I'm not wrong. So they've done multiple things. They've also done a mix of monoculture afforestation. And the learning was that if you just do one or two species, if there is any spread of disease, it will collapse. So then they started doing a mix of species. And so this whole green space that you see is actually a desert which they're trying to fill with forest. If you actually watch the videos, it's almost like, I would say, half of Europe or something like that. You're trying to actually build forests. So that's the scale of this project. But they want to do it because the desert otherwise will occupy their land. That is actually feeding the 90% of their population, or the 100% of the population, and you know what's the size of China's population. It's just after India. So this is again, they've been trying to teach this to the Middle East. They've been trying to share all their learnings. It's a very, very massive program, but it's a mix of, again, policy, a lot of the NGOs that joined in, a lot of the citizens that joined in, and they document what is working and what is not working very, very well. So coming to India, we have the Aravalli range. We also have a project that's called Aravalli Green Wall Project. And so this green line that you see stretching from I don't know if you all can see this, but Gujarat all the way till, I think, Haryana or so, or till it touches Delhi. They're trying to do this massive green afforestation program. Again, all of these are something that we're trying to understand whether it works or not. How long will it take? Is it really effective? But we have to keep trying. So these are the really large scale programs that are going on. So the closing remarks that I would like to make here is that there are no easy answers But we do know that if the soil erosion is not checked, it is not taken care of, then our food systems will collapse. I'm purely talking about human beings here. Our food systems, drinking water, which is already happening, it's happening. Basically, there is no scope for humanity to continue. Forget about climate change. Right here on Earth, we're doing things which don't make sense. And even when people are talking about moving to another planet, the first thing that they need to actually address is what are they going to do to the soil, because it's not going to support food. Are you going to ship? You're going to send people in space rockets to Mars or Moon or wherever you want life to thrive. You can't actually keep shipping food, right? And so you want to grow stuff there. And so one of the recent experiments was the chickpea, what we call as besan or senagapindi in Telugu, or the chickpeas. Those are the first crop that they're trying. So soil not just on Earth, but on other planets too, it's completely under focus. There are just no easy answers, but because we know that it is an issue, we will have to continue to look for answers. So as the team was sharing, I had a nonprofit called Dharmavana Nature Arc. This is based in Hyderabad. And here we work on biodiversity conservation, primarily safeguarding the Deccan species, primarily the forest species in a 400-acre land close to Hyderabad. So these are pictures of our 400 acres each year in different seasons. It was completely barren when the project started. And now we have a green patch, and we don't actually worry about a green color as in number of trees, but it's just that the soil has rejuvenated. And sometimes just stopping grazing, putting in some basic concepts of water conservation goes a long, long way, and stopping all the chemicals.